Early in 1983, when William was 9 months old, Charles and Diana set off for their first foreign tour together, 6 weeks in Australia and New Zealand. In another break with tradition, they took William with them, prompting stories in the press that they had done so against the Queen's wishes, which was not true. But they did defy the custom that no two heirs to the throne should travel in the same plane together. And so with William, Nanny Barnes, an entourage of 20 staff and a mountain of luggage, the royal party arrived to a rapturous reception. William, with his own little entourage of personal protection officer, nanny and chef, spent the first 4 weeks of the trip safely installed on a sheep station called Woomergama in New South Wales, while the rest of the country went into a frenzy that verged on hysteria over Lady Di, and wanted to know every last detail about her infant son. They turned out in their thousands to see her, and as she and Charles zigzagged their way across the continent, she was treated more like an A-list celebrity than a member of the British royal family. Waving flags and clutching gifts, they were desperate to catch her eye, shake her hand, touch her coat, engage her in conversation or in some way feel they had claimed a bit of her, and they were much more vocal and demanding than the Welsh had been when she and Charles toured the Principality the year before. Once again, it was obvious that Charles was no longer the star. He had never particularly sought the limelight, but like all members of the family he was used to it, and to find himself eclipsed after 34 years was painful. Proud though he was that so many people seemed to love Diana, he had never expected to play second fiddle to anyone other than the Queen. In Wales, the murmurs of disappointment when the people on one side of the street realised they were getting Charles and not Diana were faint. Down under, they were unmistakable. Returning to Woomergama every so often between engagements to see William was a blessed release. As Charles, always a prolific letter writer, wrote to friends, "I still can't get over our luck in finding such an ideal place. We were extremely happy there whenever we were allowed to escape. The great joy was that we were totally alone together." To Lady Susan Hussey he wrote, "I must tell you that your godson couldn't be in better form. He looks horribly well and is expanding visibly and with frightening rapidity. Today he actually crawled for the first time. We laughed and laughed with sheer, hysterical pleasure and now we can't stop him crawling about everywhere." They pick up the idea very quickly, don't they, when they've managed the first move. In New Zealand they all stayed together at Government House in Wellington, where William experienced his first photo call. In the garden, dressed in an embroidered romper suit, with bare legs and feet, he swiftly demonstrated his newfound skill and set off across the carpet that had been laid out for the trio to sit on, stopping only when his father grabbed him. As Charles proudly wrote to his friends the Van Cutsums, William now crawls over at Government House, at high speed, knocking everything off the tables and causing unbelievable destruction. He will be walking before long and is the greatest possible fun. You may have seen some photographs of him recently when he performed like a true professional in front of the cameras and did everything that could be expected of him. It really is encouraging to be able to provide people with some nice jolly news for a change. After a polo match the next day, Charles was presented with a miniature polo stick for William. "I suspect the first thing he will do with it is to chew it," he said. "The second thing will be to hit me sharply on the nose, but I hope in 20 years' time he will be galloping up this field, with me in a bath chair on the sideline." The pleasures of William aside, it was a long and grueling tour, and Charles was worried about Diana. She found the crowds terrifying and was exhausted much of the time. In another letter home he wrote, "I do feel desperate for Diana. There is no twitch she can make without these ghastly, and I'm quite convinced mindless people photographing it. What has got into them all? Can't they see further than the end of their noses and to what it is doing to her? How can anyone, let alone a 21-year-old, be expected to come out of all this obsessed and crazy attention unscathed?" Everyone was worried about what the media obsession with Diana was doing to her. There were photographs of her in newspapers almost every day, and often she hadn't even seen the photographer. In one picture she was inside the house at Highgrove, evidently taken with a powerful lens from across the park. Her face had become a money spinner for them all. An exclusive picture on the front page for any one of them, no matter what the caption, meant a huge hike in circulation for that newspaper. Inside, any story, however trivial, however true, excited comment. But after the initial honeymoon period when Diana could do no wrong, she began to wobble on her pedestal. The columnists that would heap praise on her one day were just as likely to hurl brickbats the next. She read every last word of it obsessively, and was as buoyed up by the praise as she was depressed by the criticism. Before William's birth, the Queen had taken the unusual step of inviting the newspaper editors to Buckingham Palace, where Michael Shea, her press secretary, appealed to them to stop harassing her daughter-in-law and to allow her private life to be private. Diana couldn't go anywhere without being photographed. She couldn't even go to the village shop to buy some wine gums. After the briefing, the editors were ushered into an adjoining room for drinks with the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. The editor of the News of the World, who had obviously been pondering on the matter of the wine gums, asked why Diana hadn't simply sent out a servant to buy them for her. "That," said the Queen, "is the most pompous suggestion I've ever heard." For a while most of the editors did stop buying the photos that came from the paparazzi, but it didn't stop the commentary and speculation, and it didn't help with Diana's fragile and at times volatile condition. As William was to discover more than 20 years later, to achieve any kind of real privacy, you had to do more than appeal to the better nature of the press.